for AI agents with terminal, by definition, you can run the Claude Code, Codex, Gemini CLI in the non-interactive mode, just for a CLI, giving a prompt what you want from this agent. But I think nowadays, actually, like any AI assistant tools, like such as Cursor, they are also moving in this direction, and they're adding more and more capabilities.
I think the interaction when you're building an app in Base 44 versus, for example, Claude Code or Cursor, it's a different interaction. Base 44's users do iterations and experimentation, has a lot to do with visual. And this set is going to expand further and further and further as time goes.
What makes 2025 the year of agentics is this idea of recursion. These are agents that could run for hours or days at a time, but the costs were prohibitively expensive. So in April of this year, what we saw was Anthropic and Claude Code came out, and they started offering a sort of unlimited all-you-could-eat buffet, which allowed for that recursion. And suddenly we were able to spawn these swarms that could run for hours on end and cost a flat fee.
Before we jump into this episode, I wanted to let you know that this podcast is for developers building with AI at the core. So whether that's exploring the latest tools, the workflows, or the best practices, this podcast's for you. A really quick ask, 90% of people who are listening to this haven't yet subscribed. So if this content has helped you build smarter, hit that subscribe button and maybe a like. All right, back to the episode.
Let's go into agents a little bit deeper in terms of the way we use them. You mentioned Cursor, you mentioned Claude Code, very different usage patterns in terms of one uses a terminal UI, one uses a more classical IDE. If we look at others, in fact, quite a few have almost favored either IDE or terminal, but there are a surprising number that favor terminal these days. Is there a best way to use an agent? Is there a way that is, easier for us to give an agent information or context? Or is it really up to the user depending on how the user prefers to interact with that agent?
Yeah, so I think the interactivity is the differentiator factor. Like when you're using an IDE with an extension like a Cursor being like visible to you, then you are like agreeing to the scenario where you are in the loop, you're always checking what happens, and you're just doing this interactively. So UI elements like simplifies and accelerates the onboarding for you as a developer. It doesn't replace you as a developer. It's just like here on the side exists to help you with achieving like specific tasks, like executing, helping you to write a specific code file or specific unit tests and so on, and be very helpful in the sense that there is a UI. You don't need to know any commands because there are buttons, and it's just like a box for you to type the text and execute. So I think like the cool part of the Cursor or Windsurf is that they are giving you this IDE with lots of UI elements to help you on board to using these tools more like proactively and in your everyday use case. While for AI agents, like with terminal, by definition, like you don't need like buttons, right? Like complex things can be done just with a combination of the keys or the commands. So terminal is like for more advanced users, for those who are ready to accelerate even further, because they don't need to have a visualization. They are okay just like living in the terminal and manipulating all the commands in the terminal. Because if you're at some point advanced the Vim or Nana or whatever editor or a Git, you actually don't need UIs, right? You can just do and achieve very hard scenarios with the terminal directly, and it saves you time. But again, like it's just like a bit harder because it's less interactive, because it's easier to lose what happens. And I think the amount of the generated information sometimes may be overwhelming. So it's hard to navigate through the terminal just because there's so many things are happening, and it requires some skill to learn how to use it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think things like Cursor, for example, where you see the changes and you can flick from file to file very, very easily. You obviously miss that from the terminal point of view, but I don't know what it is about, just being a terminal that actually just makes me feel faster, more productive at the terminal.
Yeah.
And of course, when you're at the terminal, you get the power of the terminal, right? Tell us a little bit about how you can effectively use the terminal beyond just Claude Code.
Yeah, that's true. And another super advantage of the terminal solution is that it gives you batteries to run your agent in the background, right? Like you can run the Claude Code, Codex, Gemini CLI in the non-interactive mode, just for a CLI, given a prompt, what you want from this agent to do, and it will spawn a background process and fully on its own start executing this complex request which you ask it. But I think nowadays, actually, like any AI assistant tools, such as Cursor, they are also moving in this direction, and they're adding more and more capabilities. For example, a couple of months ago, Cursor couldn't have access to a terminal. So if you run something, you needed to copy and paste directly in the text box of the Cursor, the error message, for example. But now it actually has access to a terminal, so it has access to the information which you are in the terminal using. So that's one thing. Another is that Cursor also launched their own agent, which can be also non-interactive or CLI. So they are covering this space as well. They want to get both sides and both people, who want to interact, who want to have more interactivity, and who are okay to work just with CLI.
It's funny how I think we're fairly familiar, you and I, with trying out a bunch of these. And I think everything that we've mentioned so far, I've definitely played with. I'm sure you have. And there's obviously a bunch of others. Gemini CLI, I think you actually maybe mentioned Gemini. Codex is another. Where would you say, for those listening who are kind of on the, trying to follow this 101, working out, well, where do I actually start? Where would you say is a good place to start? Is there one good place, or is it really depending on where a user is most consistently, doing those tasks? Is it better they try and find an agent in that environment? What would you recommend?
I think it depends on the level of experience and maybe on the role of the person in the company, if we're talking about some technical people, because definitely there are no-code solutions, right? Like Lovable, for example, that provides you a vibe coding platform for developing backends and frontends instantly without any knowledge of the code. So it requires you zero knowledge. It just requires you to be there to validate and approve the content generated by the AI assistant or whatever. And the more, the closer you are to the code, and the more scale you need, then the more advanced tools you need to use, which require potentially a lot of manual resolution of the problems. So, for example, if you're a software engineer and you're writing, and your goal is to develop a lot of software tasks and a lot of manipulations with the code, then you're okay to start with, first of all, a Copilot, just to see if the Copilot models are helping you to at least accelerate your productivity as a developer. So does it help you to write a better, faster code? If you're happy with the Copilots, then you're going to the next extension and go with a Cursor IDE when you're starting using these complex assistants as your companions, helping you achieving the task. And now the scope of autonomy and what assistants can do grows. So you can delegate it to change not just a function, but entire files. And once you're okay with that, then you can move to the top of this hierarchy and start using Claude Code and Cursor or Gemini CLI directly in the terminal, because now you know the strong sides of this. Now you know what you can delegate it, and probably already familiar with core capabilities and familiar with how these tools are working. So you can delegate even more scope in a fully autonomous pipeline or setup. So I think that the reasoning should be like that. Start with something super simple, which doesn't require any knowledge of code. And if you already have a knowledge, then progress further and go into more and more advanced tools.
I think it's a really, really good advice in terms of, it's not just actually about, well, there's two things I think here. One is that there's a trust implication, and it's important to be in control. Like when we start learning how to drive, we don't jump into a Ferrari and try and drive that Ferrari. It's about taking small steps.
Correct.
Once we're comfortable with it, once we trust ourselves as well as the tools that we have, we go on to the next step. And this growth in autonomy is all about that growth in trust.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. And I like the focus there as well in terms of, sticking to where you're most familiar, in that sense of if you're familiar with an IDE, well, maybe let's start, when you go from there, maybe GitHub, Copilot or something like that in the IDE is the best place. And then maybe Cursor, if you want to stay with IDE. If you love terminals, maybe dip into something else from that. Really, really like that advice. Some of our listeners may have heard of subagents before. What's the difference between an agent and a subagent?
Subagents is basically an instance, another instance of an agent, just spawned and controlled by the main agent. And you usually use that when your task is so complex that one agent is not enough to tackle it, and when there are different options or different paths that can be explored. So I think two scenarios where the problem is so complex that it needs to be split into smaller parts, or when you need to make a search to just explore the space and choose one of the options. So these two scenarios. But basically, subagent is just another instance of a main agent, which is asked to solve a specific problem. So you can think of it as a master-slave architecture, right? Like if you are, for example, interacting with a master agent, with the one which is you have access in your terminal, and you ask it to develop a service that has a front end and a back end, then it's a great candidate for splitting and spawning a sub-agents. One sub-agent will be working on the back end, another agent will be working on the front end, and they will be doing their pieces independently. And then at some point, they will go back to the master agent to communicate back the result. And the master will decide, are they okay, or is the result is fine? Does it satisfy the overall goal? And if not, then it will circle back the information to them and give a feedback. And they continue iterating or refining based on the feedback which they receive to improve this backend and front end. That's a example of how to use subagents for coding assistance for tasks beyond coding, where you need exploration. Subagents might be just a parallel instances of the same agent, which are just exploring the problem from different angles. For example, you want to search for some information, to answer some specific question, and then you can make a search with one type of query in the Google. You can make a search over the articles in the Wikipedia. You can do a search over the information available in your, local database. And for all that scenarios, they're all about the search of the information in different sources, but they are done by just a different agents. Technically speaking, in some future, there won't be need in subagents, because the master agent will be so smart and will be knowing how to resolve any challenging problem on its own. So it won't lose and won't forget about the context. It will know how to navigate in this complex structure on its own, and technically it won't need to have spawning subagents. But another motivation for the subagents is just speed. We know that agents are super slow. If you try to parallelize them, and subagents is one way of doing this, you just get your result faster. You just get 10 implementations of the same thing, and maybe one or two of them are good and working and doing what you're expecting. So it's just latency and throughput versus idling time.
I think the time that you mentioned there and the parallelization as well as the context are both really good reasons to use them. In terms of the cons, the negatives that they provide, is it like burning tokens more, or anything that we need to be cautious of?
Yeah, for sure, costs will grow linearly, right? With more agents, you will spend more. And sometimes there might be a situation where you spawn these all agents, but they actually didn't converge to anything. And another disadvantage is that there are different ways how to spawn, how to launch the subagents. One is that your main agent can launch subagents on its own, because like Cloud Code actually now gives this capability. You can ask explicitly, say explicitly in the prompt, use parallel agents to analyze this complex document, right? So you can explicitly state it in the prompt, and it will on its own spawn like multiple versions of the agents. But the thing is that you might want to have specialized some subagents, right? So instead of like general search subagents, you want to have subagents focused on a specific axis or a specific angle of a problem. And here you need like to have extra customization. You need to carefully design instructions for that subagent in order to get the best, get great result. So the downside that, like speaking of downsides, the time for designing these subagents, it's also like an art, and you need to make an effort. If you don't do it, then probably main agent will do it on its own, but the quality of the subagents might be different because it might just like miss some important bits in the instruction to the subagent.
Yeah, and in terms of the agents, like other than being able to customize an agent and be able to a subagent rather, and be able to say, hey, I want you to use this subagent when you're doing these types of things, or allow it to choose the appropriate kind of subagent to do those tasks. I presume the main agent is pretty much entirely the communicator across subagents. There's no human interaction between that bypasses the main agent.
Yeah, I mean, like it depends on the design of your system, and I think in Cloud Code it's very hard to control it. Like usually the subagents are launched on the background, so you don't actually have access directly to see what they are doing. You only can see it in the logs. So if you open the Cloud JSON-L file to see what were the commands, you will see that agents were doing something on the background, but you won't necessarily see it in your terminal. You won't necessarily see the thinking process, the path, the planning for each of the subagents. So yeah, like again, and maybe another like, I don't know, disadvantage or even advantage of this is that like you trust it even more. So you need to believe in the fact that it will come up with something meaningful even more if you are entering the world of subagents.
If you're a developer, I think a lot of vibe coding, whether it is in platforms like Base44 or if it's things that you do more locally, the Cloud Code sort of cursors of the world, you in those worlds you have a very tight relationship to the code. The LLM modifies, the agents modify the code, but when there's a problem, your sort of supervision happens on the code. I think in Base44 you can see the code, but it is a kind of a hidden entity, or it's not designed to put the code in your face too much. How have you seen, and what maybe there's like learnings about how you have built for people who don't understand code to be able to interact and get the system over the hump when it fails to deliver something, right? When it fails to accomplish something. Is it all just like give it more guidance and hope it gets it right?
Yeah. Not only, I think the interaction when you're building an app in Base44 versus, for example, if you're building an app using Cloud Code or Cursor, it's a different interaction, and many times it's a different user, and a lot of times, currently, it's a different piece of software. Mm-hmm. So I'll start with, obviously, the way that Base44's users do iterations and experimentations and so on has a lot to do with visual. Like you see the app in front of your face. You know if something is wrong, you'll see that in the interaction, or you'll see a bug being thrown away or something like that before you even look at the code. I think platforms like Base44, still there's obviously like a limited set of software that they can build. And this set is going to expand further and further and further as time goes, and that's what we're working on. But it's still important to be very honest and say there's a set of software that you'll be better off building using Cursor than using Base44. So, for example, Base44 itself, put aside the front end, which is obviously built using Base44, but the backend for Base44 is not built using Base44. It's like built using Cursor and Cloud Code and so on. because you need to look at the code and you need to understand the code and so.
Yeah.
This whole thing, like this is the situation and reality right now. I think this will aggressively change in the next few months even, but definitely few years. Again, as you'll be able to visually or like or prompts only, without looking at the code, you'll be able to build an increasing percentage of the software that you're currently building.
Right.
And so the tools that we're giving our users are a different set of tools to how they experiment and iterate with their software. It has to do a lot with visual. You have to see the application all the time. It has to do a lot with trying to explain better what's going on. So, for example, we have this small feature, but people really love it, where when you prompt something in Base 44 and it starts coding, so obviously we like most of our users don't want to see the code. It's terrifying for them. So they don't understand what's going on. And so we have another small LLM that basically watches the coding agent, see what it does, and kind of like explains to you in real time, like what's the coding agent's currently doing. And when it's like a small, like now it's changing the UI from light theme to dark theme and whatever. And so yeah, we're building a set of tools to help people build software without the need to look at code.
Yeah, that's a smart progress indications and engagements are sort of super important. So I think that makes sense to me. If I echo this back, I feel you're saying there's sort of the two domains maybe that Base 44 today is most helpful are cases where a lot of the validation and a lot of the decisions are much more product oriented and a lot more visual specifically oriented. And as opposed to sort of technical and how did you implement. And the second is that maybe a lot of them are places where that visual is also the innovation. Like a lot of the technology, you're not looking to make a product that sort of works. That's not some sort of the world's fanciest progressive web app that does a lot of things. A lot of your creation is a lot more about the content, the navigation, and all that might be sort of similar and common. And so the LLMs know how to do it well, and you can do it very efficiently. But you're innovating on sort of the content and the looks more. Does that sound fair? And then it will expand over time.
Definitely, but I'll add on top of that. I think it has more to do with the type of software that you're building, right? So if you're building nowadays something that's like performance is super important, right? Like you can't vibe code your way through it. Like it's like if you're building, I don't know, a VPN software. Let's take this for example. So obviously, like it's going to be really hard, or something that relies very heavily on like backend and stuff like that. So the previous company probably can't vibe code Sneak. At least not yet. I think for other set of applications, it's not necessarily the visuals, but more of like if you're building an application that can do what it needs to do with a database, a set of integrations, APIs, and so on. I think like you'll be like you can do a really good job using Base 44, and it will likely be an easier experience than try to code it via Cursor.
Right. Yeah.
So it has to do with like the low levelness of stuff and complexity on the backend side, but we are getting better at that.
So I have one more question on Base 44, but maybe let's first switch to how you built it. We'll talk about your stack, and then we'll combine it a little bit. I'd like to touch a bit on longevity, on like building a disposable app. I think you're creative doing it versus what do you build for long term. But take us behind the scenes a sec. So you've built, like single person, built substantial platform and also scaled it. I guess tell us a bit of the tips and tricks. I heard you shared a few of what helped you create that, and maybe started with like, do you think you could have done this? I know you used AI your creation. Like, was that critical? Do you feel you could have pulled off a Base 44 without AI dev help as a builder?
Short answer is definitely not. Or at least not in the same structure and way that I did it with Base 44. So when I started Base 44, even before knowing what I was going to do, I knew that we're in a different era. I've been like leveraging AI, working with AI in my previous company, both as like AI inside the product and also coding with AI. And I felt strongly that we're in a new era where it doesn't matter the number of people building software anymore. More matter about like if you have a unique take, unique product, kind of like, and you can design well, like design software well. I'm not speaking about like UI design. Then it's not anymore about like, hey, throw as many people at the problem as you can. Those people will write more code faster, and that's where you'll get to. So I was like, I'm going to do this alone. From day one, I'm going to set up the repository and spend 20% of my time constantly on how can I further increase the velocity and speed. So a lot of what I did is like experimentation with how LLMs write code better. Obviously, I did it for Base 44's product as well,
Right.
but even for my own repository, right? So I find those tips and tricks, like what I've spoken about, like JavaScript versus TypeScript. Maybe now it's changing with Cloud4 and so on, but back then it's like I could write front ends like the speed of light just because of the setup. Another thing is I've built this from the backend side. I built this very high level infrastructure that handles like the database and user management and so on, so that even if I would have pivoted to a completely different idea, 80% of the code would stay the same. And so I had this like really good infrastructure that stayed the same. And those were like the parts of code that it was slightly more me than the AI actually writing and making sure that it's perfect. And from there, once you have those infrastructure, and so now adding a new feature that, I don't know, has like a new table in a database and has some interaction with other parts of the platform, became super easy. The way I would measure that is for the LLM to implement a new feature, I want it to write at the least code possible to implement the feature end to end. And so I built a lot of like those things, obviously, and the rules and so on into the repository so that I could run on my own, but still keep the same velocity as my competitors, if not even better, faster. And I think to some degree I've done that. Like I think the competitors in this category are super heavily funded. And in many ways and aspects, Base 44 executed extremely fast, if not faster than a lot of the players in the category. And I give a lot of credit to the AI. Like most of the credit is to the AI of like structuring
for
it.
sort of getting me here.
I want to thank it.
Second Oscar. I get the. I think so. I love that. I guess again, kind of echoing back a little bit. I think the first thing you're sort of touting is like the value of a good architecture, where you anticipate what would be future changes, and you write the ability to write compartmentalized code. And I guess I'm hearing something that is almost similar, like to hiring either junior developers or outsourcing. Places in which if you build the right architecture, then you could have clear instructions to someone else who's maybe a little bit less trustworthy to write pieces of software within it and be able to assess whether they've done their job well and be, I guess, can be able to guide them. Does that sound like a fair analogy?
Yeah, exactly. Because also one other thing that like I've noticed is like when you're leveraging AI for coding, so think about it this way: like let's say you're building like a simple full stack web app, right? So you tell it, hey, I want it to be a to-do list app or whatever. So the AI implements like some of the routes and connects the front end and so on. And then you open up a new chat, right, in Cursor or something, and you want to implement another features like write an admin panel or so on. So it will look at your code and it will do the task. And AI is really good at that. But AI is not really good at stop and saying, oh, you know what? There's actually like common concepts here that I could combine to this infrastructure or package that I can later use in other features. And I'm writing the same code again and again. Let's stop, and before I do the task that you gave me, let's kind of implement
refactoring
let's refactor the code so that I won't need to write as much code and so on. So I think this is something that a lot of developers currently don't notice about AI. It will implement the task as you told it to.
Right.
But it's still lacking hey, let's stop for a second. We need to refactor the code because I find this common layer or whatever. And I think that's
and so that's something you still did manually. You would observe what the AI has built, and you would kind of go off and modify it. A lot of what we see with AI, which I think touches on the topic you said right now, is about the initial creation, right? And it would go off. And even there, you sort of see this sort of reward seeking, right? It might burn down the house to sort of be able to accomplish this thing that you've just sort of break all the other features, just to be able to make this feature you just asked it to make it work. But the other aspect is indeed maintainability. It's indeed code duplication. It's all these things that are sort of bad practices when it comes to sort of quality software creation. So I guess I'm asking, I think you did it on your own in Base 44 for your code base. How do you think about that in terms of building applications that are built by Base 44 to have longevity?
So in two ways. One, when you build an app in Base 44 these days, there's a lot of infrastructure and setup that happens before the LLMs even writes code that in some ways limits it, but not really, not in terms of what it needs to, but it's kind of it those are guardrails that the LLM should keep. And as long as it keeps that, then it should be fine to some degree. So again, we automatically create the entire read, update, delete, kind of the CRUD SDK, and we make it really good, and we implement rate limits on top of that and things like that the LLMs wouldn't really care about. And when you leverage APIs and integrations and so on, we keep a very strict schema. There's a lot of things that we implemented built into the application so that the LLM won't kind of be this reward seeking of I'll do whatever, but I'll keep your app exposed and so on. The other thing is, yes, at some point, we automatically feedback the LLM, whether the user knows about it or not, that it needs to refactor something. So, for example, one of the things that makes LLM confused the most, and people feel that it across the vibe coding categories, when they're saying hey, I asked it to do something, it didn't do it, it did the opposite, it deleted a feature or whatever, is when code files are getting too long.
Right.
If you've implemented, so you ask it initially or early on, hey, implement this page, create a to-do list app, and it did something simple, it's a very simple to-do list app in any other React.
Right.
And then start layering in features, right? So the LLM does what you asked it to, and it started adding AI features to write the task description, and then user management to assign different teams and boards and whatever. And at some point you have if you're not careful, you might have this very large code file. Right. And so one of the things is we're running behind the scenes refactoring tasks to maybe tell the LLM, hey, you passed the threshold, you should now refactor this file. Even if the user asks you something, first refactor the file, then implement what the user has asked you to. And I think there's a lot more to do there. But it's somewhat of this code quality agent that's keep nudging the LLM at some points if it finds that it's past the threshold of hey, there's this code here and this code here, do something, refactor that.
What was the thing do you feel that really kind of allowed us to turn agents on in our code generation? Is it context? Is it trust from humans in the process? Is it the capabilities of LLMs?
I don't think it's trust. I think anyone that's building these systems inherently doesn't trust the output and needs to spend quite a bit of time verifying that what it's actually given us is true and valid and functional and not just a kind of mock or simulated version of what we asked it. So there's a tendency for the system to kind of take the shortest path to give you the outcome. So a lot of what an engineer is doing is working with solid structures, architectures, and other things to sort of validate what's being built is functionally true and correct. Now, to your question of what makes 2025 the year of sort of agentics, if that's even a thing, is one of the big breakthroughs last year was, again, this idea of recursion. So a group of us, we created these were kind of systems that could operate on a long horizon. These are agents that could run for hours or days at a time and then eventually complete whatever problem they were given. Now, the drawback to that, we could run it for I think I did a 36-hour test, mostly just to show that I could run an agent, for 36 hours. But the costs were prohibitively expensive. And what we saw as we scaled these agents is a lot of to effectively run this, you're looking at, even on a minimal basis, around $4,000 a day. And when we really cranked it up to dozens of agents running concurrently, we were looking at $7,500 US an hour to run at a 10 agent swarm concurrently, basically. And it's substantially cheaper to hire a person at that point to do that work. It's just, even though you could do a ton of output, most applications didn't require that level of scale or capacity. So in April of this year, what we saw was Anthropic and Claude Code came out, and they started offering a sort of unlimited all-you-could-eat buffet for tokens and capability. And the first thing we did is we sort of imagined the previous iterations of what we call the Spark protocol, which allowed for that recursion. And suddenly we were able to spawn these swarms that could run for hours on end and cost a flat fee, often starting at $20, for an entire month, which went from thousands of dollars to $20, thousands of dollars an hour to $20 a month. So we saw this interesting inflection of both capability. So suddenly we were able to build things dramatically faster and with a lot more capability at an exponentially lower cost, which is an interesting sort of, you don't generally see that happen all at once. And that was basically May.
Yeah, and that's super interesting because I think is that both the making it more affordable, but also the parallelization, it really opens up the quality of what we can actually get back as well as a response. I want to talk about that in just a second. Before we move on to Swarms and Spark specifically, I'd love to talk a little bit about the foundation that you created, the Agentic Foundation. First of all, the Agentic Foundation isn't kind of like super new, I guess. Tell us a little bit about what the need was for that foundation. What's the problem it's trying to solve?
It's an organic sort of evolution of the work. And I'm going to tell you a little backstory, which is going to probably make me sound absolutely crazy, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I was early into ChatGPT. I was lucky enough to be an early beta tester. I think they called it a VIP program back in 2022 with OpenAI. And so I basically means I got it maybe 3 or 4 weeks before everybody else. And one of the first things I asked it is how can I be, and this is going to sound really egotistical, but how can I be the most influential person in AI? Is what I asked ChatGPT V1 pre-launch. And it gave me this sort of step-by-step process that said, first of all, what are you good at? What do you like? And where do you want to be in a few years? And it suggested that anything worth doing takes years of sort of prep and to get to that point. And it gave me this outline based on a kind of Q&A that you'd have with ChatGPT. And most of you have ever used ChatGPT and know the kind of, asking open-ended questions sort of routine. And it said basically you're going to have to build a social media following and you should be narrow in that focus. And so I'm asking, well, what does that actually mean? It says, well, what do you like to do? And I like to build autonomous things. I've been building cloud infrastructure for nearly 25 years. That sort of thing. And it set me down this path and said, first of all, you need to create a subreddit. Now, I know nothing of Reddit or subreddits, but I did it. I followed the guidance and 3.5 years later, I've got 100,000 plus subscribers of the subreddit. I'm not really sure exactly why or what I'm going to do with this subreddit. But it's popular. And then it said I needed to do, and the key was consistency. It said it told me that I needed to build a following by constantly posting interesting things that I'm doing and sharing those things publicly on my GitHub, creating weekly, live casts where I can interact with people. I followed the guidance, and next thing you know, I have thousands and thousands of people showing up for these live casts, following me, and essentially buying my time on a kind of only fans for geeks sort of approach, where people can sort of essentially buy my time on an hourly basis. And the craziest part of the whole story is it actually worked. And I'm in a fortunate position where I can claim more than 100 customers, 20 Fortune 500 clients. And I'm literally one guy, one company. Company one. And my wife actually helps with some of the non-technical parts, but generally speaking, it's me and my bots. And the entire sort of business plan and process was literally set forth by ChatGPT V1, which is in itself just amazing to me.
Did the LLM tell you to create the foundation, or was that something that you've...
The foundation was an evolution of those early conversations. No, it didn't exactly say that. And what happened was, as the community coalesced around the concepts of agentics and the sort of practical approaches that we were taking to implement the agentic systems, it became pretty clear that we were in the midst of a new profession. And when you look historically at different professions, and let me be honest, AI gives you sort of delusions of grandeur often. But in this particular case, there was a group of us, and we're realizing that we are all practicing a sort of similar approach to the sort of engineering of AI. And when we looked at it, we saw a spectrum. We saw on one end we had these vibe coders. These vibe coders are not, I'm not saying that vibe coding isn't important. It's a great ideation, learning, and discovery sort of mechanism, but it's very free form. It's very fluid in what you're doing without really much of a plan. And what we were doing was different. What we were doing is creating architectures and process and approaches that were repeatable with a defined outcome. That was an engineering activity. And what we saw was the term agentics and agentic engineering was starting to be co-opted by large companies who were essentially kind of AI washing the concept. They were saying it was an agent, but it was a chatbot or it was a vibe coding system. And we saw this as an opportunity for us to say, well, this is our approach. This is what we believe an agentic engineer as a professional or as a profession should encompass, both technically as well as the sort of ideas of almost like a guild, but for our group of engineering, right? So we're the stonemasons for this new emerging field of agentic engineering for AI. And the group formed around that. It's open. It's the sort of antithesis of some of the corporate-led open groups, OpenAI sort of being the other end of the spectrum, dominated by corporate interests. We said we need to make this for people to sort of empower them both professionally and maybe there's some more aspirational, but as the society around AI takes shape, what does that actually look like? And how do we protect the interests of the people ultimately that are going to be affected by it most? So we want anyway to act as a kind of hedge against trillion-dollar companies. If we can do that. And that was formed in March of this year. And next thing we know, we're in something like 60 cities. We've got multiple events, sort of organic startups or, meetups all around the world happening every week.
And people can just join that. What was the best way for people to kind of like get involved?
Well, we've got a lot of the communication and community happens around either our Discord channel, discord.agentics.org, or WhatsApp. Our WhatsApp's maxed out, so I'm not going to give you the address because when you hit the certain threshold, you basically can't add anybody. But most of it we've shifted to Discord at this point, and agentics.org. It's again a member-led organization, meritocracy, if you will. So if you want to get involved, you want to create a new chapter in a different city, do a meetup. Basically, you just volunteer, and we make it happen.
So if we were to look at the state of agentic today, what would you say are kind of the things that are creating that ceiling for agentic today? What are the biggest things that causing agentic development to fail, or at least to cause problems to developers trying to use agentic development today?
the limiting factors of the space right now. And there was an interesting report from MIT a couple weeks ago, I think it was, that basically said 95% of agentic projects fail. And it was a fairly sort of sensational title. And when you dig into that a little bit, there's two ways to think about those types of sort of stats. One, 95% of projects fail, which is probably true. But the reason for that failure is likely 99% of engineers, programmers, developers, project managers don't know how to actually build agentic systems. And it's a byproduct of a new emerging space. And it's so the limiting factor is the fact that it's really hard to look beyond the sort of I'm going to call it AI washing, the agentic washing of products, and the people associated with it to determine what the capabilities of the products and the people implementing these products really are. So when you see this sort of high failure rate, it speaks to the fact that we're in a new emerging space. And when you go, if you're old enough to have been around at the beginning of the internet, you would have seen the same thing with a lot of the internet projects that corporations took on back in the late 90s. And there was this sort of, this idea that the internet wasn't quite going to cut it for most business type applications. And then they were wrong. It was the fact that we didn't, as a industry, understand exactly how to build user-friendly internet-based applications. And over time, there were models to follow. Amazons and the eBays and whatnot showed up, and we're like, okay, this is how you create a web-based service that people can easily interact with. And it's not just recreating software. Same problem 25 years later, 30 years later in the agentics and AI space. There's a tendency for people to build applications the way they've always built them, with human-centric models, review cycles, long drawn-out sprints, and different sort of traditional tactics that were optimized for a world where we built slowly over time and gradually. Now we're in a world where we can literally copy anything anywhere at a moment's notice. And the ability, the quality of the code, although important, is less important than the momentum that you get in terms of speed and time to market. So when you're looking at companies that are embracing this, they're embracing this in a way that doesn't just replace their developers. That might be a byproduct, but it augments them in ways that those developers were never able to do before. So you're empowering them with sort of a kind of superpower to create much more effectively and much more quickly, which in itself creates a whole variety of secondary problems. But ultimately, this is the empowerment of developers to do more with less.